You're about to watch a man destroy a 30-year career in exactly 3 minutes. They say you should never judge a book by its cover, but Captain Greg Sullivan was about to learn that you should definitely never judge a passenger by her skin color, especially when she holds the title deed to the aircraft you are flying. This is the story of how a billion-dollar mistake happened at Gate 42 and why revenge is a dish best served at 30,000 feet. Get your things and get out of that seat right now. The voice boomed across the first-class cabin of Liberty Airways Flight 729, shattering the peaceful hum of pre-flight boarding. Captain Greg Maverick Sullivan did not just speak, he barked, and his face was a shade of red that matched the emergency exit signs. He loomed over seat 1A, blocking the aisle with his broad shoulders and the arrogance of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. Kendra Vance did not flinch. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply adjusted the cuff of her $3,000 Saint Laurent blazer and looked up at him with eyes as cold as the champagne she was holding. She had not even taken a sip yet, but before she could bring the crystal flute to her lips, a hand snatched it away. It was Tiffany, the head flight attendant, and Greg's personal pit bull. "I will take that before you spill it on the upholstery." Tiffany sneered, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that was more insulting than a slap. She looked at Kendra like she was a stain on the carpet that needed to be scrubbed out. But then, the miracle of selective service happened. In the exact same motion, Tiffany pivoted to seat 1B where Emily Vance was sitting. Emily was Kendra's sister-in-law. She was also white. "Here is a hot towel for your hands, ma'am." Tiffany cooed at Emily, her smile transforming instantly into genuine warmth. "I am so sorry for this disturbance. Please just try to relax while we handle this situation." The contrast was so sharp it could cut glass. Kendra sat there empty-handed and insulted while Emily was treated like royalty 2 feet away. "Listen to me." Greg leaned down, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mints. "I do not care if you won the lottery or used some rapper's frequent flyer miles to upgrade. Seat 1A is reserved for actual VIPs, not for people who got lucky. You need to move to seat 34B immediately, or you are getting off my plane." The cabin went deadly silent. Every eye was on Kendra. They were waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for the angry black woman stereotype that Greg was so desperate to provoke. But Kendra Vance was not just a passenger. She was the CEO of Vance Capital Holdings, and she knew something that Greg did not. She did not just pay for the seat. She paid for the wings, the engine, and the cockpit he was standing in. "I am not moving anywhere, Captain." Kendra Vance's voice was smooth like velvet but heavy like iron. She did not shout. She did not stand up to meet his aggression. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. With a swipe of her thumb, she maximized the brightness on her screen and held it up directly in front of Captain Greg's furious face. "Read it," she said calmly. "Seat 1A, paid in full, $8,400. Unless you have a refund in cash right here in your pocket, I suggest you step back and check your manifest again, because I am not giving up a seat I paid for just because you made a mistake." Greg blinked. For a second, the sheer confidence in her voice made him hesitate. He was used to people shrinking away when he raised his voice. He was not used to a black woman in a blazer looking at him like he was a misbehaving child. But before Greg could respond, the sound of a high-pitched voice cut through the tension like a chainsaw. "Yo guys, what is up? It is your boy Trent back with another travel vlog, and we are about to hit LA for the wildest weekend ever." Walking onto the plane was Trent Sterling. He was 25 years old, wearing designer sunglasses inside a dimly lit aircraft cabin, which told you everything you needed to know about his personality. He was holding a phone on a stabilizer stick, recording himself spinning around to capture the faces of the flight attendants who forced strained smiles. Trent stopped in the aisle, his camera still rolling. He looked at seat 1A, then he looked at his own phone, then he looked at Captain Greg. He did not even look at Kendra. To him, she was just an object blocking his view. "Hey, Cap," Trent said, pointing a manicured finger at Kendra while still looking at his phone screen. "Why is there a person in my seat? My dad is going to be super annoyed if I miss the pre-flight champagne service. You know how he gets when things are not perfect." The transformation in Captain Greg was instantaneous and sickening. The red-faced monster who had just been screaming at Kendra vanished. In his place was a groveling servant. Greg spun around his face, breaking into a wide, obsequious smile. "Mr. Sterling, so good to see you again." Greg actually bowed slightly. "I apologize for the delay. Just a minor technical glitch with the booking system. We are sorting it out right now." Then Greg spun back to Kendra, and the smile fell off his face like a mask hitting the floor. The vein in his neck was throbbing again. You heard the man, Greg hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "This seat is needed for a high-priority passenger. It is a matter of national security." Kendra looked from the sweating captain to the boy in the sunglasses, who was now making duck faces at his camera. National security. Kendra repeated slowly, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "He is live streaming on TikTok and complaining about champagne. Since when is a frat boy vacation a matter of national security?" "Do not get smart with me." Greg stepped closer, invading her personal space. He loomed over her, trying to use his physical size to intimidate her. "We have rights to reassign seating for operational needs under federal aviation regulations. You are being reassigned to row 34. Now move, or I will have you moved." The injustice was so thick you could taste it. It was bitter and metallic. Kendra tightened her grip on her phone, her knuckles turning slightly lighter. She was calculating. She was waiting. But someone else had reached their breaking point. "Are you people insane?" The voice came from seat 1B. Emily Vance stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were blazing. She dropped the hot towel Tiffany had given her onto the floor. "She is not moving anywhere because she is with me," Emily said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "She is my sister-in-law. We are traveling together. We booked these tickets weeks ago. You cannot just kick her out because some spoiled brat wants her seat." The cabin went silent. Trent stopped recording for a second, looking confused. Greg looked annoyed, but it was Tiffany, the flight attendant, who delivered the blow that hurt more than any physical slap could. Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cruel sound. She walked over to Emily and placed a hand on her shoulder, ignoring Kendra entirely. She leaned in close, speaking in a loud stage whisper that was clearly meant for the first 5 rows to hear. "Oh, honey, you are so sweet," Tiffany cooed, her voice dripping with condescension. "But you do not need to lie to protect the help. We know how it is with these assistants. They try to take advantage of their employer's kindness and book seats they do not deserve." The air left the cabin. Kendra felt a cold fire ignite in her chest. "The help," Emily whispered, her face turning pale. "Did you just call my sister-in-law the help?" Tiffany rolled her eyes as if she was explaining simple math to a toddler. "Nanny assistant, whatever." Tiffany waved her hand dismissively in Kendra's direction. "The point is, she is in Mr. Sterling's seat, and she needs to go back to economy, where the staff sits so the actual VIPs can fly in peace. Now sit down, Mrs. Vance, and let the captain handle the personnel issues." It was not just an insult. It was an erasure. In Tiffany's eyes, it was impossible for a black woman to be the equal of the white woman sitting next to her. She could only be a servant, a subordinate, someone who belonged in the back. Kendra looked at Tiffany. She looked at Greg. She looked at Trent, who was now laughing and reading comments from his live stream. "Wow, chat is going crazy," Trent said to his phone. "This lady is trying to steal my seat. Can you believe the audacity?" Kendra slowly uncrossed her legs. She did not look at Emily. She looked straight at Captain Greg. "So that is how we are playing this," she said softly. "You are going to regret this, Captain. But not as much as you are going to regret touching me." "Move!" Greg shouted, pointing to the back of the plane. "Now, I am done asking nicely." Captain Greg Sullivan did not just speak the words, he spat them out like venom. He was tired of the debate. He was tired of the delay. And most of all, he was tired of a woman who did not know her place defying his authority on his ship. He looked at Trent Sterling, who was still hovering in the aisle holding his phone, and gave a sharp nod toward seat 1A. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Greg commanded. "Just sit down. If she does not want to move voluntarily, we will help her understand the reality of gravity." Trent did not hesitate. He did not even look at Kendra as a human being. To him, she was just an obstacle, a piece of luggage that had been left in the wrong spot. He adjusted his sunglasses, grinned at his live stream audience, and simply dropped his weight. He did not sit in the empty space. He sat right on the armrest. His heavy denim-clad hips slammed into Kendra's shoulder. It was a calculated physical violation. He leaned his entire body weight against her, forcing her into the corner of the seat. The smell of expensive cologne and stale sweat invaded her personal space. "Excuse me," Kendra gasped. She had no choice. The physical pressure forced her to recoil. As she tried to stand up to escape the suffocation of Trent's body pressing against her, she lost her balance. The heel of her Italian leather pump caught on the edge of the plush aisle carpet. Kendra stumbled backward out of the seat. She flailed for a moment, grasping at the air, trying to maintain her dignity, but gravity was not on her side. She landed hard on one foot, teetering into the narrow aisle. And then came the sound that made her heart stop. Thud. Her handbag, a matte alligator Hermes Birkin, worth more than the captain's annual salary, slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor. The clasp popped open. A few items spilled out. A gold pen, a tube of lipstick, and the corner of a thick blue legal folder containing the acquisition contracts for the airline. Tiffany, the flight attendant, saw the bag on the floor. She did not bend down to help. She did not apologize. Instead, she looked at the $50,000 masterpiece of craftsmanship lying on the carpet and sneered. "Get this trash out of the way," Tiffany snapped. With the toe of her regulation shoe, Tiffany kicked the bag. She actually kicked it. She shoved it hard, sending it skidding under the seat in front of them, right into the dust and grime where passengers rested their feet. "That is a tripping hazard," Tiffany said, dusting off her hands as if she had just touched something filthy. Kendra stood in the aisle. Her shoulder throbbed where Trent had crushed her. Her ankle burned from the twist. But her eyes were fixed on her bag lying in the dirt. Inside that bag were documents that could dissolve the entire board of directors. Inside that bag was the power to end careers, and they had just kicked it like a piece of garbage. Trent finally settled into the seat, stretching his legs out and sighing with exaggerated relief. Finally, Trent said to his phone, "Man, that was a struggle. Some people just have zero class, right, guys? Anyway, look at this leg room." Kendra straightened her blazer. She took a deep breath. The entire cabin was watching her. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers burning into her back. Some were sympathetic, but most just wanted the drama to be over so they could take off. She looked at Captain Greg. He was standing with his arms crossed, a smug look of victory plastered across his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had just put an unruly passenger in her place. Kendra did not scream. She did not attack. She went deadly quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a tsunami hits the shore. The water recedes and everything goes still. "Captain," she said. Her voice was lower now, colder than the air outside the plane. She looked him dead in the eye. She stripped away all the emotion, all the anger, and left only the raw, hard truth. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" Greg rolled his eyes. He checked his watch. He was already 5 minutes behind schedule. "I am done talking to you," he said dismissively. Kendra took one step closer. She did not back down. "Look at the manifest, Captain," she said. "I am asking you to do one thing before you destroy your life. Look at the name on the ticket, not just the seat number. The name, K. Vance. Does that name mean nothing to you?" For a split second, a flicker of doubt crossed Greg's eyes. Vance. The name was familiar. It was plastered on the side of the airport hangar they had just taxied past. It was on the leasing agreements in the cockpit. It was a name associated with power money and aviation royalty. But Greg looked at Kendra. He saw a black woman in a suit standing alone in the aisle being jeered at by his flight attendant. His prejudice was a thick wall that logic could not penetrate. In his mind, there was no way this woman could be that Vance. It was impossible. Greg let out a short, barking laugh. "Vance," he repeated, shaking his head. "Yeah, I saw the name. Common name. What are you, a distant cousin of the owner's asking for a handout? Or maybe you just changed your last name to sound important." He stepped forward, his chest almost touching hers, using his height to look down on her. "Let me make this crystal clear," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I do not care if your name is Barack Obama. On this plane I am God, and God is telling you to take your distant relative attitude and march your ass back to row 34 before I have you put in zip ties." Kendra looked at him for one long second. She memorized his face. She memorized the number of stripes on his shoulder. She memorized the smug look of satisfaction on Tiffany's face and the oblivious entitlement of Trent in her seat. "Okay," Kendra said softly. It was not a surrender. It was a sentence. "I will go," she said. She turned around. She did not look back at the seat she had paid for. She did not look back at the bag that was still under the seat. She began the long walk down the aisle toward the back of the plane. But as she walked, she was not thinking about the cramped seat waiting for her in economy. She was thinking about the phone call she was about to make. She was thinking about the fact that Captain Greg Sullivan had just ordered the owner of the plane to sit in the back. And she was thinking that God was about to have a very bad day. The heavy blue curtain snapped shut behind Kendra, separating the world of champagne and hot towels from the world of cramped knees and recycled air. It was a physical barrier, but it felt like a slap in the face. She walked down the narrow aisle of the economy cabin, her heels clicking on the thin carpet with a rhythm that sounded like a ticking clock. This was the walk of shame. It was a ritual designed to humiliate. Captain Greg and his crew wanted her to feel small. They wanted the other passengers to look at her and see a troublemaker, someone who had been rejected from the promised land of first class. And the passengers were looking. Heads turned as she passed. People lowered their magazines and took off their headphones. The whispers started almost immediately. They buzzed around her like flies. "What did she do?" someone whispered from row 10. "Probably tried to sneak into first class," a woman in row 11 muttered loud enough for Kendra to hear. "You know how they are always trying to get something for free." Kendra kept her chin parallel to the floor. Her face was a mask of stone. She did not look at the people judging her. She looked straight ahead at the exit sign at the very back of the plane. She was not walking to her seat. She was walking toward her destiny. But she was not walking alone. In seat 12C, a young man named Jaden was watching. Jaden was 19 years old, a sophomore at NYU, and he had been filming the entire time. He had seen the way the captain loomed over Kendra. He had seen the way the flight attendant kicked her bag, and he knew exactly what was happening. Jaden pulled his phone up and hit the Go Live button on TikTok. He did not hesitate. He typed the caption with thumbs that moved at the speed of light. "Liberty Airways kicks black woman out of first class for white influencer." "Yo guys, you need to see this right now," Jaden whispered into his microphone, his voice urgent and low. "I am on flight 729 leaving JFK and the pilot just literally forced a black lady out of her paid seat so some rich kid could sit there. I am not joking. Look at her." He flipped the camera. The lens caught Kendra, walking down the aisle, her back straight, her designer suit looking out of place among the gray seats. The viewer count on the top right corner of Jaden's screen started to tick up. 50 viewers, 100, 500. The algorithm caught the tension in his voice and the injustice in the image, and it threw gasoline on the fire. "Look at the chat," Jaden said, reading the comments scrolling up his screen. User Mike says, "Lawsuit incoming." User Sarah says, "That is Trent Sterling. I recognize him. He is awful." User Black Traveler says, "I am canceling my Liberty card right now." Within 3 minutes, there were 2,000 people watching the live stream. The court of public opinion was in session, and the jury was furious. Kendra reached the back of the plane. The air was stale back here. The seats were narrow. There was no space for her legs, let alone her dignity. She turned around to face the front, just in time to see the curtain fly open again. It was Emily. Kendra had expected Emily to stay. It was the easier choice. It was the comfortable choice. But Emily Vance was running down the aisle, her face wet with tears, her hands trembling. "Emily, wait," Kendra said softly. "You do not have to do this. I am not staying up there with those monsters." Emily said, her voice shaking but loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. She stopped right in front of Kendra, breathing hard. "If they treat you like trash, they treat me like trash. We are family. A ripple of shock went through the economy cabin. The passengers who had been whispering about Kendra being a fraud or a troublemaker suddenly went quiet. They looked from the white woman in the expensive cashmere sweater to the black woman in the power suit. They saw the bond. They saw the love, and the narrative began to shift. Jaden zoomed in on them. Did you guys hear that Jaden said to his 5,000 viewers? That is her sister-in-law. She just walked out of first class to stand with her. This is real allyship right here. The hearts in the chat are going crazy. But not everyone was happy about this display of solidarity. At the front of the plane, Captain Greg saw Emily run out. He saw the empty seat in 1B. He saw the control of his cabin slipping away like sand through his fingers. He stormed through the curtain, marching down the aisle with a stride that screamed authority. He did not see Jaden's phone filming him. He only saw two women defying his orders. Mrs. Vance Greg boomed his voice, echoing off the overhead bins. You need to return to your seat immediately. The seatbelt sign is on. You are creating a safety hazard. Emily turned to face him. She wiped the tears from her cheeks. I am not sitting in that seat, Emily said. I would rather sit in the cargo hold than sit next to that thief you let on the plane. You are disrupting this flight. Greg shouted, his face turning that dangerous shade of purple again. I have tolerated enough. You go back to your seat or I will have you removed too. Then remove me, Emily challenged him. Greg froze. He looked around. He saw the passengers in economy staring at him. They were not looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him with suspicion. He saw Jaden holding up a phone. He saw a grandmother in row 15 shaking her head. He realized he was losing the room, but his ego was too big to let him back down. He had given an order, and in his world, orders were obeyed. Fine, Greg spat. If you want to stand back here like cattle, that is your choice, but do not expect any service. And if I hear one more word from either of you, I am turning this plane around and handing you both over to the FBI for interfering with a flight crew. He turned on his heel and stomped back toward the front, tearing the curtain open and disappearing into the sanctuary of the elite. Kendra watched him go. She felt the heat of the passengers' eyes on her. She felt Emily's hand squeeze hers. And she felt the vibration of Jaden's phone capturing every single second of the tyranny. She looked at Emily. You did not have to do that, Kendra whispered. Yes, I did, Emily said firmly. Now where are we going to sit? Kendra looked at the last row, the seats that did not recline, the seats right next to the toilets. Right there, she said. As they squeezed into the cramped seats, Kendra pulled her phone back out. She saw the signal bars were still strong. She saw the email from her legal team. And she saw the notification from the bank. Greg thought he had won the battle because he had the uniform. He did not realize he had just started a war with the general, and the army was already assembling in the comments section of a 19-year-old boy's TikTok. The air in row 34 smelled of blue antiseptic fluid and stale coffee. It was the tightest corner of the aircraft where the seats did not recline, and the engine noise was a constant deafening roar. Kendra and Emily had barely managed to squeeze into the cramped space, their knees pressing against the hard plastic of the seats in front of them when the aisle suddenly went dark. A shadow had fallen over them. Kendra looked up. Captain Greg was back. But this time he was not just angry. He was unhinged. His chest was heaving beneath his white shirt, and his hands were balled into fists at his sides. He looked like a man who had lost control of his kingdom and was ready to burn it down to prove a point. You two really think you can just come back here and sit down after defying my direct orders? Greg hissed. His voice was trembling with rage. You think this is a game? You think you can embarrass me in front of my crew and then just enjoy the flight? Captain, we moved. Kendra said, her voice level and calm. We are in the seats you assigned. We are not speaking. We are not causing a scene. You are the one shouting. Do not tell me what I am doing, Greg shouted so loud that a baby in row 20 started crying. You are a security threat. Both of you. You have undermined the authority of the flight deck. I cannot trust you not to storm the cockpit the moment we are in the air. He reached for the interphone handset on the wall next to the rear galley. He yanked it off the cradle and pressed the button for the main cabin PA system. His voice boomed through the speakers, cracking with static and malice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I regret to inform you that we are unable to depart at this time. We have unruly passengers in the rear of the aircraft who are refusing to comply with safety regulations. We are holding here at the gate for law enforcement. Please remain seated." The reaction was instantaneous. A collective groan rippled through the plane. 200 people who just wanted to get to Los Angeles turned in their seats to glare at the back row. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to hostility. Greg had successfully weaponized the passengers' impatience against Kendra. "You see that," Greg said, hanging up the phone and smirking at Kendra. "That is on you. Now the Port Authority police are on their way, and when they get here, you are leaving in handcuffs." Kendra did not flinch. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She knew exactly what Greg was doing. It was a power play. He needed to humiliate her completely to restore his fragile ego. 10 minutes passed. The air conditioning had been turned off and the cabin was getting hot. Then came the heavy thud of boots on the jet bridge. 2 officers from the Port Authority Police Department stepped onto the plane. They were large men wearing dark blue uniforms with heavy utility belts that jingled with the sound of radios, tasers, and handcuffs. They walked down the aisle, scanning the faces of the passengers. "Over here," Greg called out from the back. He waved them down like he was hailing a taxi. "These 2, right here." The officers stopped at row 34. The first officer, a tall man with a shaved head and sunglasses named Officer Miller, looked at Greg and then at the 2 women squeezed into the corner. "What seems to be the problem?" Captain Miller asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. "She is the problem." Greg pointed a shaking finger directly at Kendra's face. "She refused to vacate a seat she did not pay for. She became aggressive with my flight crew. She caused a disturbance that compromised the safety of the flight. And now she is refusing to deplane. I want her arrested for interference with a flight crew and trespassing." Officer Miller looked at Kendra. He saw a black woman in a suit. Then he looked at Emily. He saw a white woman with tear-stained cheeks looking terrified. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, addressing Kendra, his voice dropping an octave into that command tone that police use when they expect a fight. "You need to grab your things and step out into the aisle. Now." "I have done nothing wrong," Kendra said. "I paid for a first-class ticket. I was forced back here. I am complying." "Stop resisting," Miller snapped. He did not ask for her side of the story. He did not ask to see her ticket. He simply accepted the captain's narrative because the captain wore a uniform, and Kendra fit the description of a suspect. He reached into the row, his hand moving toward Kendra's arm. "No." The scream came from Emily. It was raw and desperate. Emily Vance threw herself across the space between the seats, placing her body between the officer and Kendra. She spread her arms wide, shielding her sister-in-law with her own physical form. "You are not touching her," Emily screamed, tears streaming down her face. "She has done nothing. The captain is lying. He is the one who is aggressive. If you arrest her, you have to arrest me too." The officers hesitated. The dynamic had shifted. They were trained to deal with aggressive suspects, but they were not trained to deal with a weeping white woman protecting a black woman. The visual confused their bias. Officer Miller took a step back, holding up his hands in a calming gesture toward Emily. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," Miller said, his voice suddenly soft and gentle. "Nobody wants to hurt you. You seem like you are just caught up in this. Just step aside and let us do our job. We do not want to arrest you. Do you not hear yourself?" Emily sobbed. "You are treating me like a victim and her like a criminal just because of how we look. I am the one screaming. I am the one blocking you. Why are you being nice to me?" Officer Miller sighed. He looked at his partner, Officer Davis. Davis was younger, bigger, and looked impatient. "Ma'am, step aside or you will be charged with obstruction," Davis barked. He did not wait for Emily to move. He reached past her, shoving her shoulder roughly to get to Kendra. The physical contact made Emily yelp, but the target was clearly Kendra. Davis grabbed Kendra's left wrist. He did not hold it, he crushed it. His grip was tight enough to bruise. He yanked her upward, forcing her to stand up in the cramped space. Kendra gasped as her shoulder twisted at an awkward angle. "Get up!" Davis shouted, pulling her into the aisle. Kendra stumbled out, her blazer bunching up around her arms. She did not fight back. She knew that any resistance, any flinch, any pull away would be used as an excuse for them to tackle her or tase her. She went limp, allowing them to manhandle her. "Turn around," Davis ordered, spinning her roughly so her face was pressed against the closed door of the lavatory. Hands behind your back. Kendra felt her arms being wrenched backward. Her chest was pressed against the cold plastic of the bathroom door. She could see Greg standing a few feet away, arms crossed, a look of pure vindication on his face. He was smiling. He was actually smiling. Then came the sound. Click, click. The sound of metal ratcheting on metal. The sound of freedom being taken away. The handcuffs were cold against her skin. They were tight, too tight, biting into her wrists. The entire plane went deathly silent. The passengers who had been grumbling about the delay stopped talking. The baby stopped crying. Even Trent Sterling at the front of the plane had stopped his commentary. There was something profoundly disturbing about the image. A woman in a $3,000 suit handcuffed like a violent criminal next to the toilet, while a weeping white woman begged the police to stop. "You are making a mistake," Kendra said. Her cheek was pressed against the lavatory door, but her eyes were open, and they were fixed on Officer Miller. "You are making a mistake that is going to cost you your badge." Officer Miller laughed. It was a nervous laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. "I do not think so, lady," he said. "You are going to the station. Section 449. Interfering with flight operations. That is a federal offense." Emily tried to grab Miller's arm. "Please listen to me," she begged. "She owns the company. She owns the leasing rights." Officer Miller brushed Emily off like she was a fly. "Sure she does, ma'am," he said condescendingly. "And I am the King of England. Now step back or you are going in the second pair of cuffs." Greg stepped forward, leaning in close to Kendra's ear as the officers began to march her forward. "Have a nice trip to the precinct," Greg whispered. "Maybe next time you will learn to sit where you belong." Kendra let the officers push her forward. She walked with her head high, despite the metal binding her hands behind her back. She walked past the rows of silent faces. She walked past Jaden, who was filming with tears in his eyes, his hand over his mouth in shock. As they reached the front of the plane, Trent Sterling held up his phone to get a close-up of the handcuffs. "Damn, that is crazy," Trent said. "She really got arrested." Kendra stopped. The officers tried to shove her, but she planted her feet. She looked at Trent. Then she looked at the cockpit door. "Officer," she said loudly, her voice carrying through the silent cabin. "Before you take me off this plane, I have one request. Check the tail number. Just ask the tower to read you the registration owner of N888VC. Move." Davis shoved her hard. "We are done talking." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Not in the officers who were too blinded by the adrenaline of the arrest, but in the silence of the cabin, the reality of what was happening began to settle in. They were dragging a woman off a plane for sitting in a seat she had paid for, and they were doing it with a brutality that stripped away the veneer of civilization. Kendra Vance was being led away in chains. But as she stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, she was not thinking about the humiliation. She was thinking about the text message she had sent just before the cuffs went on, the text message to her legal team. "Execute Protocol 0, she had typed. Protocol 0 was the nuclear option. It meant total asset freeze. It meant immediate contract termination. Captain Greg thought he was taking out the trash. He did not realize he had just pulled the pin on a grenade and dropped it in his own lap. The metal cuffs bit into Kendra's wrists, cutting off the circulation, but the pain was distant. Her mind was operating on a different frequency. While Officer Davis shoved her forward, forcing her head down like she was a common drug dealer, Kendra locked eyes with her sister-in-law. "Emily, listen to me," Kendra said, her voice low and urgent, cutting through the chaos. "Open my bag, get the phone, call Arthur, tell him to turn on the news right now, and then find the red card in the hidden pocket of my wallet. Call the number on the back." Emily was shaking so hard she could barely stand. She scrambled to pick up the Hermes bag from the floor where Tiffany had kicked it. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp. She pulled out the sleek black iPhone. Officer Miller tried to stop her. "Hey, put that down," Miller warned, taking a step toward Emily. "That is evidence." But he was too slow. And honestly, he was too distracted by the growing mob of angry passengers who were now standing up in the aisle blocking his path. Emily tapped the screen. The phone lit up, illuminating the dim cabin. The wallpaper was not a picture of a dog or a sunset. It was a high-resolution photo of Kendra standing on a tarmac holding a giant pair of golden scissors, cutting a red ribbon in front of a massive private hangar. Behind her in the photo was a fleet of jets. The sign above the hangar read Vance Global Logistics. It was a picture of a woman who did not just fly on planes. She built them. But it was the notification that popped up at that exact second that froze the blood in Emily's veins. Ping. A message banner slid down from the top of the screen. Sender Board of Directors. Message: Liberty Airways acquisition agreement is 90% complete. We are ready to sign as soon as you land. Emily gasped. She covered her mouth with her hands, staring at the screen, then at Kendra, who was being twisted into a painful position by the police. The irony was suffocating. The woman they were treating like a criminal was literally in the process of buying the company that was arresting her. "Oh my God," Emily whispered. "Kendra, they do not know." In row 12, Jaden saw the light of the phone screen. He saw the look on Emily's face. His instincts as a content creator kicked in. He leaned over the seat, extending his arm to get a better angle. He zoomed in. The camera on his phone was high definition. It caught the text on the screen perfectly. The words Liberty Airways acquisition were legible to everyone watching the stream. "Yo, yo, yo, stop everything!" Jaden screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. He turned the camera back to his face, his eyes wide with shock. "Chat, are you seeing this? Zoom in. Look at that notification. She is not just some lady, she is buying the airline. Do you hear me? She is buying the whole damn airline." The viewer count on the screen exploded. It went from 2,000 to 10,000 to 50,000 in the blink of an eye. The comments were scrolling so fast, they were a blur. User Lawyer Up says, "OMG, they are arresting their new boss." User Flight Risk says, "This is the biggest mistake in aviation history." User Justice for Kendra says, "Keep filming, do not stop." Jaden shouted to the officers, "Hey officer, you might want to read her text before you take her off. You are arresting the woman who pays your salary." Officer Davis ignored him. He pushed Kendra harder toward the exit door. "Move it," he growled. Kendra looked back one last time. She saw the realization dawning on Emily's face. She saw Jaden broadcasting her truth to the world, and she saw the notification on her screen that confirmed her power. "Do not worry, Emily." Kendra said, her voice calm amidst the storm. "Just call the number. The show is just beginning. Get her off this plane right now." Captain Greg was vibrating with impatience. He was checking his watch every 3 seconds. He looked over at Trent Sterling, who was now standing in the aisle of first class, tapping his foot like a petulant child waiting for his dessert. "My bro has a pool party in Malibu starting in 4 hours. Trent shouted, his voice whining and entitled. "If I miss the DJ set, my dad is going to sue this whole airline. I paid for speed, not for a drama show." Greg turned back to the officers, his eyes bulging. "You heard the VIP," Greg barked. "We are burning fuel sitting here. Drag her if you have to. I want wheels up in 5 minutes or I'm filing a report against your precinct for incompetence." Officer Davis tightened his grip on Kendra's arm. He shoved her forward hard. Kendra stumbled, her shoulder slamming against the bulkhead. The open cabin door was right there. Beyond it lay the jet bridge, the cold concrete of the terminal, and a jail cell. This was the threshold. If she crossed this line, the humiliation would be complete. If she let them take her off the plane, she would just be another statistic, another black woman dragged out of a white space. Kendra dug her heels into the metal strip of the doorway. She used every ounce of core strength she possessed. She did not fight the officers, she simply anchored herself to the floor like a statue of justice. "Wait!" Kendra screamed. It was not a plea. It was not a beg. It was a command. It was the voice she used when she walked into a boardroom full of men and told them the deal was off. It was a voice that demanded silence. The sheer power of it made Officer Davis pause. Even Trent stopped tapping his foot. "Before you make the single biggest mistake of your entire careers," Kendra said, breathing hard, her eyes locking onto Officer Miller's sunglasses. "Give me 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds." She turned her head to look at Captain Greg. "You want to take off, Captain? You want to get to your destination? Well, I am telling you right now that this bird does not fly without me. It is physically and legally impossible for this plane to leave the ground if I am not on board." The cabin went quiet. For a second, the weight of her words hung in the air. Was she a federal marshal? Was she a doctor carrying a donor organ? The mystery paralyzed them. But then Greg laughed. It started as a chuckle and ended as a cruel, ugly cackle that echoed off the cockpit door. He shook his head, looking at Kendra with a mixture of pity and disgust. He stepped closer, leaning in so close she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. He looked her up and down, taking in her messy hair, her twisted blazer, and the handcuffs on her wrists. "Who do you think you are?" Greg sneered, his lip curling. "Why cannot we fly without you? What are you?" "The mechanic." He looked around at the passengers, inviting them to join in his joke. "Did you hear that, folks?" Greg mocked. "She thinks she fixed the engine. Or maybe she thinks she is the one who washes the windows. That is it, right? You left your mop bucket in the cargo hold and we cannot leave without it." The insult landed like a physical blow. He could not conceive of her as anything other than labor. In his world, she was either a servant or a nuisance. Kendra stopped struggling against the cuffs. She went completely still. A cold smile touched the corners of her lips. It was the smile of a predator who has just watched the prey walk into the trap. "No, Captain," she said softly. "I am not the mechanic, but you are about to wish I was." The laughter from Captain Greg was still echoing off the walls of the jet bridge, a harsh and ugly sound that made the skin crawl. He looked at Officer Davis and winked as if they were sharing an inside joke about the delusional woman in handcuffs. "She thinks she is the mechanic." Greg chuckled, shaking his head. "That is a good one. Maybe she thinks she is the air marshal too. Get her out of here before she claims she is the President of the United States." Officer Davis tightened his grip on Kendra's shoulder, preparing to shove her forward into the terminal. But he never got the chance. At that exact moment, Emily Vance lunged forward. She moved with a speed that surprised everyone, including herself. She did not attack the officers. She did not try to break the handcuffs. She simply thrust the glowing screen of Kendra's iPhone directly into the space between Kendra and the captain. The screen was active. The call timer was counting up, and the speaker button was glowing green. "Just listen," Emily screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "Just listen to the phone, you idiots." Officer Davis instinctively recoiled, his hand dropping to his taser. But before he could draw a weapon, a voice boomed from the tiny speakers of the phone. It was a voice that commanded immediate obedience. It was deep, resonant, and carried the unmistakable cadence of a man who charges $2,000 an hour for his time. Officer unhand Mrs. Vance immediately. The authority in the voice froze the entire scene. It was not a request. It was an order. Officer Davis blinked, confused. He looked at the phone, then at Greg. "Who is this?" Greg demanded, trying to regain control. "Who is interfering with this arrest?" The voice on the speaker did not hesitate. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am the Chief General Counsel for Vance Capital Holdings. We are currently watching a live stream broadcast from seat 12C of your aircraft. I have 19 other lawyers in the room with me, and I am currently on a priority line with the Federal Aviation Administration Tower at JFK. The color began to drain from Greg's face. He knew the name Marcus Thorne. Everyone in the corporate world knew that name. He was a shark who ate other sharks for breakfast. "I do not care who you are, lawyers," Greg stammered, his voice losing its edge. "This passenger is disruptive. She is being removed. You are not removing a passenger." "Captain," the lawyer continued, his voice cutting through the air like a scalpel, "you are assaulting the asset owner. I have just transmitted a formal cease and desist order to the tower. Ground stop, Order 4. 4 Alpha has been filed. That aircraft is now legally grounded. If you attempt to move the plane or the principal asset, Mrs. Vance, 1 more inch, you will be committing a federal felony involving the theft of capital property." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. The officers let go of Kendra. They took a step back, their hands hovering away from their belts. They looked at each other with wide eyes, realizing they had walked into a minefield. Kendra rolled her shoulders, shaking off the lingering pain of the officer's grip. She stood tall in the doorway of the plane, her hands still cuffed behind her back, but her posture screaming dominance. She turned slowly to face Captain Greg. Greg was staring at the phone, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a man trying to solve a math problem in a language he did not speak. I do not understand, Greg whispered. Asset owner. Liberty Airways owns this plane. It is painted on the side. Kendra let out a soft sigh. It was the sound of a teacher disappointed in a slow student. She took a step toward him. Captain, look at me, Kendra said. Her voice was no longer the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a predator playing with its food. You are a pilot, Greg. You know how to fly the plane. But you clearly have no idea how the aviation industry actually works. You see that logo on the side of the jet? That is just paint. It is a sticker. It is marketing. She leaned in closer, her eyes locking onto his. Liberty Airways has not turned a profit in 5 years. You are drowning in debt. You do not have the capital to buy a $200 million Boeing 787. You cannot even afford the fuel without a line of credit. So do you know what you do? You lease. She let the word hang in the air. You rent the planes, Kendra continued. You sign a contract with a holding company that actually has the money. You pay a monthly fee to use the machine, just like you lease your car. And do you know who you lease this specific aircraft from? Greg swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. He looked at the tail number on the cockpit dashboard. N888VC, VC, he whispered. Vance Capital, Kendra said, finishing his thought. I am not the mechanic captain, and I am definitely not a distant relative looking for a free ride. She turned her body so that the officers and Trent and everyone watching the live stream could hear her clearly. I am the chairman of the board of Vance Capital. I hold the title of ownership for this aircraft. I hold the mortgage on your company headquarters, and I hold the debt that pays your salary. She paused, letting the gravity of the situation crush him. You tried to kick me off my own property, Greg. You put me in handcuffs on a vehicle that I bought and paid for. You are not the captain of this ship anymore. You are just a tenant who is behind on his rent. And as of this moment, your lease is expired. The phone in Emily's hand crackled again. That is correct, Mrs. Vance, the lawyer said. The repossession order has been filed. Technically, Captain Sullivan, you are now trespassing on private property. Kendra smiled. Kendra. It was a terrifying smile. So, Captain, she said softly, get off my plane. Emily reached into the designer tote bag that was still sitting on the floor where Tiffany had kicked it. Her hands were shaking, but she managed to pull out the sleek silver iPad Pro. She unlocked it with a trembling finger and handed it to Kendra. The handcuffs were gone now, removed by officers who were suddenly very interested in preserving their own careers. Kendra rubbed her wrists where the red marks were already forming, but she did not look at them. She looked at the screen. She tapped the icon for the Vance Global Asset Management app. It was a proprietary piece of software that only 3 people in the world had access to. The screen loaded a 3D model of the globe with thousands of tiny blue planes moving across it in real time. Kendra pinched the screen, zooming in on New York City. She tapped the blue dot blinking right at Terminal 4. Look at this, Captain, Kendra said, holding the iPad up so Greg could see. On the screen, a digital dossier popped up. It listed every single specification of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner they were standing on. Engine cycles, fuel load, maintenance history, and right at the top in bold white letters was the registration number, N888VC. You see that suffix? Kendra asked, her voice cutting through the silence of the cabin. VC. It does not stand for Very Cool Captain. It stands for Vance Capital. She scrolled down. The text on the screen was dense, full of legal jargon and complex clauses. But Kendra knew exactly where to look. She highlighted a paragraph in red. Clause 14.2 of the Master Lease Agreement, Kendra read aloud. Her voice was clear, crisp, and deadly. The lessor reserves the right to immediate repossession of the asset and termination of the lease without notice if the lessee or their agents engage in conduct that violates federal anti-discrimination laws or commits acts of moral turpitude that damage the reputation of the lessor. She lowered the iPad and looked Greg dead in the eye. Moral turpitude, Kendra repeated. That means behavior that violates the accepted standard of the community, like dragging a black woman off a plane she owns because you assume she cannot afford a seat. Greg felt the blood drain from his face. His knees actually buckled slightly. He reached out to steady himself on the bulkhead. He knew what this meant. He knew the law. If Kendra revoked the lease right now, this plane was no longer a commercial airliner operated by Liberty Airways. It was a private jet owned by Vance Capital. And Greg was not authorized to fly it. If he touched the throttle now, if he even tried to push back from the gate, he would be committing a felony. It would be grand theft. Not grand theft auto, but grand theft aero. He would be stealing a $200 million asset. He would go to federal prison for 20 years. My God, Greg whispered. He looked at the cockpit. The controls he had spent 30 years mastering were suddenly forbidden territory. But not everyone understood the gravity of the situation. Trent Sterling stood up from seat 1A. He had been watching this exchange with growing annoyance. He did not care about lease agreements. He did not care about tail numbers. He cared about his pool party in Los Angeles. "This is boring," Trent shouted, throwing his hands in the air. He stepped into the aisle, pushing past Tiffany, who was cowering against the galley wall. He marched right up to Kendra, getting in her face. "I do not care who you are," Trent yelled, his voice cracking. "I do not care if you own the plane or the moon or the entire universe. My dad is Senator Sterling. Do you know what he can do to you? He eats people like you for breakfast." Trent poked a finger at Kendra's chest. "We have a schedule. I have followers waiting. So stop waving your little iPad around and let the pilot fly the damn plane. If we are not in the air in 5 minutes, I'm going to have my dad shut down your little company." The cabin gasped. The audacity was breathtaking. Kendra did not back away. She did not blink. She looked at Trent's finger poking her blazer, then she looked up at his sunglasses. She smiled. But it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who was about to crush an insect. "Senator Sterling," Kendra said calmly. "Yes, I know him. He campaigned on a platform of family values and law and order. I wonder how his voters will feel when they see the video of his son assaulting a woman and demanding to hijack a private aircraft." She took a step forward, forcing Trent to step back. "And as for your schedule," Kendra continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream, "you seem to be confused about your location. You are currently standing in my living room. This is my property, and you are an intruder." She turned to Officer Miller, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. "Officer, this man is trespassing on a private vessel. He is harassing the owner, and I want him removed." Trent laughed nervously. "You cannot kick me off," he stammered. "I am a VIP." Kendra leaned in close. "Then tell your dad to send a helicopter to pick you up, because this plane is now my private jet, and I am not running a taxi service for spoiled brats. You are not invited to my party. Get off." The silence in the cabin was broken by a sound that made Captain Greg jump out of his skin. It was the shrill, piercing ringtone of his personal cell phone. He fumbled for it in his breast pocket, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He looked at the caller ID and his face turned the color of ash. It was CEO Richard Sterling. Not Trent's father, but the man who ran Liberty Airways. The man who signed Greg's paychecks. Greg stared at the phone. He knew he had to answer. If he ignored the CEO during a grounded flight, he would be fired anyway. With a trembling finger, he swiped across the screen, but in his nervousness, he hit the speaker button. Greg. The voice that exploded from the phone was so loud it distorted the tiny speakers. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated panic. "Greg, what the hell are you doing?" "Sir, I have a situation," Greg stammered, trying to turn the volume down, but his fingers were too sweaty to work the buttons. "I have a disruptive passenger claiming she owns the—" "Shut up, Greg, just shut up." The CEO cut him off. Every passenger on the plane was listening now. Even the police officers had leaned in to hear. "I just received a fax from the legal department of Vance Capital Holdings. Do you know what it says, Greg? It says they are triggering the default clause on our entire fleet. They are repossessing 40 aircraft effective immediately." Greg looked at Kendra. She was standing there calm and collected, watching him with eyes that held zero mercy. "Sir, she is just a passenger." Greg tried to argue, but his voice was weak. "She is not a passenger, you idiot," the CEO screamed. "She is Kendra Vance. She is the woman who just bought 51% of our stock this morning. You are currently trying to arrest the future chairman of the board." The words hit Greg like a physical blow. Chairman of the board. The woman he had ordered to the back of the plane. The woman he had called a distant relative. The woman whose bag had been kicked by his flight attendant. She was not just the landlord. She was his new boss. "You need to fix this." Greg, the CEO, continued, his voice cracking with desperation. "If that plane does not take off with her in seat 1A, you are done. We are all done. Do you hear me? Fix it or do not bother coming back to New York." The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Greg's hand went limp. His expensive flight radio slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the floor, bouncing once before settling at Kendra's feet. He looked at her, but he could not see the passenger anymore. He only saw the end of his life as he knew it. Behind him in the galley, Tiffany, the flight attendant who had been so vocal, so cruel just minutes ago, quietly unlatched the curtain. She stepped backward, disappearing into the kitchen area, trying to make herself invisible, trying to erase herself from the narrative she had helped create. But it was too late. Kendra watched the curtain close. Then she looked down at the radio on the floor. She did not pick it up. She stepped over it. She walked past Greg, ignoring him completely as if he were a ghost. She walked straight up to Officer Miller and Officer Davis. "Gentlemen," Kendra said. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "The dynamic has changed. I am no longer the suspect. I am the property owner reporting a crime in progress." She raised a hand and pointed a manicured finger directly at Captain Greg, who was still standing there paralyzed by shock. Then she moved her finger to point at Trent Sterling, who had frozen in the aisle, his mouth hanging open. "I would like to press charges," Kendra said, "against him, and him." Officer Miller blinked behind his sunglasses. He looked at the captain who had just been disowned by his own CEO. He looked at the woman who controlled the fate of the airline. He was a cop, but he was also a survivor. He knew which way the wind was blowing. "What are the charges?" Ma'am Miller asked. His tone respectful, deferential, almost apologetic. "Trespassing on private corporate property," Kendra listed, counting off on her fingers. "Harassment of the principal owner. And regarding Mr. Sterling, assault. He physically forced me from my seat. That is battery." She looked Officer Miller in the eye. "I want them off my aircraft. Now." The officers did not hesitate. They did not look at Greg for permission. They turned on him. The predator became the prey in the span of a heartbeat. Officer Davis stepped forward, grabbing Greg by the arm. It was the same rough grip he had used on Kendra, but this time it was applied to the man with the gold stripes. "Let is go," Captain Davis growled. "You are coming with us. Get your hands off me," Greg sputtered, trying to pull away. "I am the pilot. You cannot arrest the pilot. You are not the pilot anymore," Greg, Kendra said coldly. "You are just a liability." Trent Sterling saw the police coming for him. Panic replaced his arrogance. He scrambled backward, tripping over his own carry-on bag. "No, no, no," Trent screamed as Officer Miller grabbed him by the collar of his designer hoodie. "You cannot do this. My dad is a senator. Do you know who I am?" He flailed, kicking out at the seats, trying to resist as they dragged him down the aisle toward the exit door. "I am Trent Sterling. I am a VIP. You are making a huge mistake." As they dragged him past the first row, Emily Vance stepped out. She was holding her purse and Kendra's Hermes bag, which she had rescued from the floor. She looked at Trent struggling in the grip of the police. She looked at his sunglasses, which had fallen off, revealing his terrified eyes. Emily smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in an hour. "We know exactly who you are," Emily said loud enough for the live stream to hear. "You are the guy who just got kicked out of seat 1A. She paused, letting the moment hang in the air before delivering the final blow. "To make room for the Queen," Trent screamed as he was hauled out of the plane and into the jet bridge, followed closely by a broken, defeated Captain Greg. The sound of their protests faded as the cabin door slammed shut, sealing the victory inside. The walk from the jet bridge to the terminal was the longest journey of Captain Greg Sullivan's life. When the police escorted him through the sliding glass doors, he was not met with the anonymity he had hoped for. He was met with a wall of flashing lights. Jaden's livestream had done more than just alert the lawyers. It had alerted the world. News crews from CNN, Fox, and MSNBC were waiting right there at the gate. They captured every second of the disgraced pilot being led away in handcuffs, his head hanging low, his gold stripes stripped of all meaning. The consequences were swift and brutal. Before Greg even reached the precinct, the Federal Aviation Administration had already suspended his license pending an investigation. But everyone knew the truth. He would never fly again. The man who thought he owned the sky was grounded forever, not just by the law, but by the public shame of his own arrogance. Back on board the aircraft, the atmosphere had transformed. The tension that had choked the cabin was replaced by a stunned silence that slowly gave way to relief. Kendra Vance stood at the front of the plane. She was still wearing her wrinkled blazer. Her wrists were still red from the handcuffs, but she stood with the grace of a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. She looked at the passengers. She saw the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty about whether the flight would be canceled. She picked up the intercom handset. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice warm and steady. "I want to apologize for the delay and for the unpleasant scene you just witnessed. No one should have to see that, and certainly no one should have to endure it." She paused, looking at the empty seat in 1A where Trent had sat, and the empty cockpit where Greg had ruled. "We are going to get you to Los Angeles," she continued. "We have a reserve crew on the way. And because I know this has been stressful, I am authorizing free premium Wi-Fi and complimentary food and beverage service for every single passenger on this plane, regardless of where you are sitting. Today there is no economy class. Today, you are guests in my house." The cabin erupted. It started with a slow clap from the back row where she had been forced to sit, and it swelled into a roar of applause. People cheered, some cried. They were not cheering for the free drinks. They were cheering for dignity. They were cheering because for once the good guy won. 3 months later, the landscape of Liberty Airways had changed completely. Following the viral incident, the airline's stock price had plummeted. It was a disaster for the shareholders, but it was a calculated opportunity for Vance Capital. Kendra used the leverage to execute a hostile takeover, buying up the devalued stock until she controlled the majority share. She did not just buy the company, she gutted it. In a press conference held on the tarmac in front of the very plane where she had been arrested, Kendra announced the implementation of the Vance protocols. It was the most aggressive anti-discrimination policy in aviation history. From this day forward, Kendra announced to the press, every single flight crew member will be equipped with body cameras during passenger disputes. There will be no more, he said, she said. There will be truth. She announced the formation of an independent oversight board comprised of civil rights leaders and aviation experts to review every single complaint of bias. But the biggest announcement was personal. She introduced the new head of diversity experience, a woman who had proven her commitment to justice, not with words, but with action. Emily Vance stepped up to the microphone. She looked different now, stronger. She was no longer just the sister-in-law. She was an executive. "We are not just flying planes," Emily said, her voice ringing with confidence. "We are lifting standards. If you cannot respect your passengers, you do not belong in our sky." The final scene of this story takes place on a rainy Tuesday morning in New York. The Boeing 787 with tail number N888VC was parked at the gate. Kendra and Emily walked up the jet bridge. They were laughing, talking about quarterly reports and family dinners. As they stepped onto the plane, they paused at row 1. Seat 1A was empty, waiting. A new pilot stepped out of the cockpit. She was a woman of color with sharp, intelligent eyes and a smile that radiated genuine warmth. She saw Kendra and Emily, and she did not ask for their tickets. She did not ask if they belonged there. She stood at attention and saluted. "Welcome aboard, Madam Chairman," the pilot said. "We are ready for departure." Kendra smiled. She looked at the seat that had started a revolution. She looked at Emily, who had stood by her when the world turned its back. And then she looked at the pilot. "Take us up, Captain," Kendra said. As the plane taxied toward the runway, soaring past the terminal where Greg used to walk like a king, a final thought echoed in the minds of everyone who knew the story. It is a simple lesson, but an expensive one if you forget it. Never judge a book by its cover, And never ever fight for a seat with the woman who owns the entire library. If you believe that dignity is worth more than a first-class ticket and that justice always finds a way to land safely, please hit that like button and share this story. Let us know in the comments if you have ever stood up for someone when it mattered most. Subscribe for more stories of truth, power, and the unstoppable force of doing the right thing. Because your voice is the only ticket you need.